Before we start with the formal program, I'd like to make a couple of housekeeping remarks. First of all, we work with a technology called Pigeonhole today. Most of you are probably aware of that. It allows you to ask questions through your mobile phone to the various speakers that we have in the panels this morning. So the way to do this is you go to pigeonhole.at. We'll run a brief demo so that you will know how it works. The passcode is MIX, all capitals, M-I-C-S. And what we can do now, just to check whether it works or not, is we'll go through a brief demonstration where I will ask, or we will ask, a rather silly question. You provide the answer and we'll know whether the technology works or not. So while I'm talking here, my colleague Mike will coordinate that. The question would be, how many people do you think we have in the room today, this moment? Is it 100, 200, 300, or 400? So the way you do this, you go to the web page, you select one of the answers. It's a multiple choice thing. And then we, from our side, can collect your answers and provide you with the feedback. So here we go. So these are the answers right now. 11 people, 100, 5, 200, and 2 more than 400. That's a bit overambitious, I think. We have around 200 people in the room, but I guess the point is Pigeonhole works. So in the opening session and in the remaining sessions, you can use this technology to direct your questions at the panelists in case you're a little bit too shy to stand up and walk to the microphone. Second, I think we should announce that we have a lively presence on social media. We make active use of Twitter with the hashtag, if the technology doesn't leave us, no, the hashtag MIX2017. So we can be followed on Twitter also. We can be followed on our Facebook page, Independent Evaluation on Facebook. And all the sessions will be live streamed on both YouTube and Facebook. Then in your folders you will find an evaluation form. Please do us a big favor and at the end of the day fill out the information for the evaluation form and provide us with your feedback on today's proceedings. You can either find it online, but there's also a hard copy in your folder. Then I would like to draw your attention to a book launch that we have included in the program after the third session on regional cooperation and integration. This is the latest book authored by Dr. Vinod Thomas, the former Director General of the Independent Evaluation Department at the ADB. So after session 3, we will have a launch of his latest book on climate change and natural disasters, and the book will also be for sale at a highly discounted price after the launch in the lobby behind us. Then for all our sponsored participants, during the lunch break, please get in touch with my colleagues Rachel and Carmina regarding DSA and other logistic matters. And with that, I think it's time for me to ask Marvin Taylor-Dormond, the current Director General of Independent Evaluation, to come to the stage for some brief welcome remarks. Marvin.
Distinguished guests and participants, I would like to welcome you today to this seminar, which we are jointly organizing with the Faculty of Economics of Thammasat University. We're doing this together with the Independent Evaluation Department of the Asian Development Bank. We have proposed to you a title of the seminar in the form of a question, and the question is whether middle-income countries in Asia and the Pacific are caught in a trap. This, to me, is an existential question for Asia, and I'll come back to that in a moment and explain why I believe it is an existential question. But for now, please allow me to profusely thank our college from Thammasat University for the fantastic way in which we have collaborated together, both IED, my IED colleagues and them, to put together this seminar. It has become now a tradition in IED, the Independent Evaluation Department at ADB, to organize this one learning event, one major learning event a year, and in doing so, we have endeavored to do it jointly with very well-known knowledge institutions of the region. And in previous year, we've done similar events with the University of the Philippines, with the National University of Singapore. This year, we're truly grateful that we have the opportunity to be here in Bangkok under the wings of Thammasat University. So thank you very much. Let me come back to the key question that we have proposed for this seminar. As I said, the overall theme of the seminar is whether middle-income countries are caught in a trap. And hopefully we will advance in this conversation today and try to get an answer to this question. But before we go too far, let us stop for a moment. The very reason why we can ask this question, why we can pose this question, is precisely the impressive progress that has taken place in Asia over the last 25 years. Millions of people have been pulled out of poverty in this region. The region continues to grow. It's the fastest growth in the world. And for ADB, 37 out of the 40 client countries of ADB are now middle-income countries. So the first thing to do before we pose the question is to celebrate the extraordinary achievement of this region. But at the same time, just because we celebrate, we cannot remain complacent. And that is why we are here. It has been hypothesized that there is a middle-income trap. This means that there is the possibility of a deceleration of growth, of an interrupted transformation of our economic structures, loss of our competitive edge, the risk of getting stuck in being middle-income countries and not continue moving forward, the risk of not being able to attain a higher income status. Because on the one hand, middle-income countries cannot compete, that's the argument, with low-income countries through low wages. But at the same time, they cannot compete with high productivity countries, high-income countries. And so they become trapped in that income levels. Of course, there are doubts about this hypothesis. How long should a country be in an income level to be declared caught in a trap at that level? And as a matter of fact, it takes a good number of years. It has taken a good number of years already to move from low-income countries to middle-income countries. So transitioning takes a long time. How can you call it a trap if we're still working on improving our level of income and economic structure? I mean, what is the evidence, on the other hand, that deceleration, if any, in middle-income countries is stronger than at any other income levels? So there are many doubts about this. But whichever the case, some of you may have noticed that the 2017 influential World Development Report, the World Bank Group, have dedicated a section to the point. So it is clearly in the minds of people, and it has said that, contrary to what many growth theories predict, there's no tendency for low and middle-income countries to converge towards high-income countries. And a compelling conclusion is a compelling economic theory that can guide growth for middle-income countries still lacking. So there is an issue. There's certainly an issue. So colleagues, what is clear, whichever the case is, what is clear is that what got us here will not get us there. Things will have to be made or done differently. The challenge is to move from growth dependent on abundant and cheap labor and more capital to growth based on higher productivity levels. This is what the economist calls a healthy growth of a total productivity, total factor productivity. And this certainly will need innovation, education. I know that we'll hear about that. Efficient allocation of resources, strong institutions. And this is definitely not an easy task. Evidently, to sum up, the jury is still out on this matter. And again, we're just going to start talking about the issue today. The intention of the seminar is to advance the conversation because colleagues, paraphrasing the famous expression of Julius Caesar, Bini, Bidi, Bici. It is not enough for us to say, we came, we saw, we conquered the middle income status. We should continue charging forward for our Asian countries to attain ever higher levels of development and for our people to escape once and for all from the scourge of poverty. That is the ultimate motivation for us to spend a full day discussing this matter. And so thank you again to everyone, especially to the presenters, the panelists, and the staff that is behind, both from Thammasat University and from IED, behind the organization of this event. And we wish you, together, Thammasat and us wish you a day filled of exciting discussions. Thank you so very much.
And with that, I have the great honor to invite to the stage today's keynote speaker, former Deputy Prime Minister of Thailand. And now I'm going to work on the correct pronunciation of the name. Professor Surakiat Sathirathai. It is my great honor to invite you to the stage to provide your keynote address for this session.
Mr. Marvin Taylor-Dormond, Director General, Independent Evaluation Department of the Asian Development Bank, Associate Professor Dr. Shayan Tanti Wasarakan, Dean of the Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University, several distinguished academics, friends from all over the world, my very respected academics where I see Professor Dr. Praipun Kumsap, distinguished speakers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for the kind words of introduction and the invitation extended to me both by the ADB and the Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University. It really is an honor for me to be able to take part in this very important conference that deals with a subject that lies in the very heart of so many people who are involved in the development issues. Even more importantly is how the title of the conference is phrased, Caught in a Trap, Asia and the Pacific Middle-Income Countries at the Crossroads. And I like the way you introduce it, that it is the theme of the question mark. Are we caught in this trap? If so, can we get out of it and how? What are the conditions to get Asia-Pacific countries out of this trap? Are we arriving at a crossroads where we have to determine which direction to drive on? What to do next? And do we all have similar options and solutions? There seems to be countless questions, but it is hoped that the four sessions throughout the course of the conference today would be able to provide some answers more than posing even more questions. Global and regional economic and financial institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, and ADB have done several forecasts and research studies on this very subject of countries being caught in the middle income trap. Different predictions based on different calculations and different set of data have been published. Some countries are forecast to rid themselves of the trap faster than others. Respective governments prefer to look for forecasts and prediction most favorable or at least unfavorable to that economy, to give hope for the people to step out of this trap before too long. But whether that should become realistic depends on so many economic, social, and political factors, especially the issue of the need for structural reform. Having said that, I believe there's one very common factor in each and every country that is caught in this trap, and that factor needs to be effectively addressed in order to get past these crossroads. That is, how to better prepare their respective human resources and the right education for the workforce that would enable the economy to get out of the trap. In so doing, one needs to be reminded that today the circumstances around our economy and society are changing at such an unprecedentedly faster speed than any time in history. Today and every day, technological innovation surpass the old ones. Our friend already introduced the new technology for the participation in the conference, for example. Today and every day, the cyber world keeps changing. Today and every day, one has to learn something new in the learning process. And today and every day, there is a need to understand new and emerging knowledge and innovation. Evidently, today's education shall mean providing the tools for our human resource to be prepared to cope with everyday new challenges. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, would you believe it if only a few years ago you were told that you could own the largest and international taxi company without a single car, without a single car of your own? Today we have Uber. Would you believe that you could operate the largest and international accommodation rental company without owning a single hotel, a single house, or a single building? Today we have Airbnb. Would you believe that you could own a major phone company without any telecommunication infrastructure and to own the most valuable retailer without any inventory? Today we have Skype and Alibaba. You would never have thought that a business model like that of Uber, Airbnb, Skype, and Alibaba would have existed and successfully made the owners big millionaires. Automation, robotization, and digitization brought with them a new economy, a new productivity, and a new technology that might not have been imagined only a few years ago. Each of us from the Asia-Pacific countries may have to revisit with urgency the respective educational system, whether our education is appropriately preparing our children, our future human resource for this new economy, new productivity, new technology to take us out of the trap and to grow and sustain beyond it without leaving anyone behind. Allow me to do just that with the Thai education, if I may. Could the Thai educational system properly prepare our children and future human resource to take us to overcome this middle income trap? We've been talking about educational reform, and we have undertaken several series of education reform in the past for years and decades. But admittedly, despite those reforms, the Thai education has not yet sufficiently produced highly skilled workforce to move the country beyond the middle income trap. Like the country and its economy, Thailand's education system also stands at a crossroads and trapped. Our education budget is around 20% of the national budget and around 4% of the GDP. This is not a shameful figure at all by any developing country standard. The basic education, which includes the primary and secondary education, have deservedly taken the lion's share of this budget. But has it produced the desirable outcome? Has it satisfactorily improved the opportunities, the equality, and the quality of education? The shift in the recent curriculum reform has been designed to do away with the rote learning system and to shift from a teacher-centered approach to a learner-centered one in the primary and secondary education. It is hoped to significantly change the outcome of the quality of the secondary school children. But will this improvement be extended to the children attending schools in remote villages as opposed to big cities? What remains the big problem in the Thai education system lies in the vocational or technical and tertiary education. This is one of the root causes to determine if our country could get out of the middle income trap by producing the appropriate workforce. For far too long, the vocational and technical education in this country has been regarded as education for the dropouts, for the hooligans, for those in the lower and poorer class of the society. Vocational students have been looked down as the less brainy students who are incapable of achieving a university study and a degree, or even sometimes thought of as failure kids. University education, on the other hand, has been regarded as education for the smarter kids and those in the middle class bracket upward. University education is also regarded as an important step for kids to climb up social echelon. Besides, strangely enough, the word for university education in Thai language, Udom Siksa, is not resonant to the concept of higher education. But loosely translated, it means, Udom Siksa means complete education, translated loosely. Parents of all walks of life, therefore, do whatever they could to afford their kids to study in universities. For achieving a university degree means you have offered your kid in the best chance to have completed the education process, the Udom Siksa. University education has hence become an important social value indicator. For decades, a university degree means a license for better jobs, as well as social recognition. A vocational technical diploma, on the other hand, may imply that its holder is just a second-class citizen. This is unlike how technical diploma holders are treated in many developed countries like Germany, Japan, France, the Scandinavian, and the UK, which have developed their workforce recognizing that skilled and technical workforce is the backbone of their economy and industry. Well-trained vocational technical graduates are needed in those countries and can even earn better pay than university counterparts. Their kids feel that going to vocational or technical colleges is as good an option for their future, or even a better option than a university. The situation in Thailand, and I'm not sure about other friends in the region, however, has been the opposite. The civil servant salary scale by the government clearly reiterates this predicament by fixing the salary of the university degree holders higher without due regard to skill. This government salary scale is also replicated in many parts of the private sector. As parents, we have to ask ourselves if we can afford it. Would we prefer to see our kids with a vocational technical diploma earning a lower scale of salary, or without a higher university degree to earn higher salary? even becoming debt-ridden, parents would naturally prefer the latter. How many of us here would prefer to send our kids to vocational technical education? As a consequence, a vocational technical diploma is never enough to get anyone a reasonably well-paid job. Kids as well as parents feel obliged to proceed to do a university degree even if there is no need. So, Thailand ends up with abundant number of university degree holders employed in jobs which only require vocational or technical college skills. The vocational technical student environment in technical colleges steadily declined. This trend is further emphasized when the Ministry of Education decided to solve the situation and address this trend by offering vocational and technical students to continue with university degrees in vocational and technical colleges, adding few more years to their education to graduate to do the job they in fact could do well without a degree. But at present, do we need to produce more university degree graduates, or do we need to produce more skilled workforce to get us out of the middle income trap? Have we put our resources to come up with innovation if we said innovation is the answer to get the country out of the middle income trap? Both of these questions are key to getting the country out of the middle income trap, in my view. The country, Thailand, consequently has ended up with a shortage of skilled labor, which has become one of the most pressing constraints to growth. More importantly, the country also lacks the competitive edge to adopt new technologies. It seems that we lack of both skilled workers and we lack innovation. It falls far behind in research and development. The R&D research and development budget accounts for only 1.4% of our GDP, and half of which comes from the private sector. University researchers do not produce enough innovations which could be commercially viable. There's a big gap of cooperation, understanding, working relation between academic institutions and the private sector. The knowledge-based economy that was so popularly touted several years ago did not bear the desirable fruit, since the education system, especially the higher education, lacks the genuine and effective competence to deliver. The tertiary education sector has produced too many social science, business and marketing graduates, but too few engineers and scientists. It has produced too many graduates who can copy, but too few who can innovate. This means that our education never gives priority to knowledge-based education. Until recently, it has not produced enough graduates with strong foundation in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It hasn't produced enough graduates to be able to fully engage in the lifelong learning, because graduating a degree is already an education that is complete, the Udom Siksa. And it has produced too few graduates, if I may add, with English proficiency. This year, almost 200,000 graduates remain unemployed, while Thailand still lacks workforce. Interesting dilemma. Clearly, the workforce we produce does not match the demand under the global mega trends, aging society, technology, urbanization, and all that. And many of those who get employed find themselves in jobs that do not require a university education or qualification. Only about a quarter of vocational and technical diploma and bachelor degree holders in science found themselves in jobs directly related to their skill. 40% of the bachelor degree holders were employed in jobs which do not need a university degree. I've been chairing the board of several firms, corporations, and we have seen this in front of us. As the fourth industrial revolution, and as Thailand has adopted to be our fourth economic reform, or call it Thailand 4.0, ushering in, and is regarded as the means to rid our nation of the middle income trap. It is more than imperative that we design our future workforce and education that will produce such an outcome. With the global mega trends in mind, what are we to train our workforce and how? With the AEC, the ASEAN Economic Community, beckoning the freer movement of labor, what are we to prepare our next generation of our kids with and how? Ladies and gentlemen, we need innovation, but we lack knowledge as an important foundation for innovation. Knowledge comes from research and development, but we also lack sufficient funding for the R&D. On the other hand, we need to produce technology users, people who can apply technology application, but we produce university graduates who are not needed in the market. We can no longer afford to be misled again in our education master plan. The time for more education reform may be too late, as we already have done that several times. This is the time for a major overhaul of the entire education system that results in more equal opportunities and quality teaching in the basic education system from kindergarten to secondary schools. This education must help each individual child develop both its IQ and EQ. It must unleash every child's brain from any undue inhibition to think, analyze, and be creative. Vocational, technical, and agricultural colleges must no longer be viewed as education for the dropouts or the hooligans. It must become a place where most kids feel proud to enter and graduate with acceptable skills and satisfactorily well-paid job. These colleges must form the national backbone to produce new skilled workforce that responds to the industry, to the private sector demands. Technological and applied science universities must produce hands-on graduates with knowledge and skill to work, to supervise, to innovate in any workplace. We may need to produce a human resource with skills to use and apply technology rather than only inventing technology. Agricultural colleges and universities all over the country must teach agricultural technology to improve productivity and modern agricultural sector. All must be accustomed with Internet of Things, the IoT technology with adequate English proficiency. Universities must change and adopt new approaches for teaching and training to be truly responsive to the labor market and technological advances. While the number of university entries will continue to decline due to demographical changes, as I said earlier, their survival depends on the ability to produce graduates that truly meet the changing demand and are acceptable to the market. And if a new Ministry of Higher Education is to be created soon, should it consider whether the technical and vocational education be regarded as the lower education or part of the higher education? Shouldn't the higher education mean any education beyond the basic education level? Surely, if we continue to look at the concept of university education as the Udom Siksa, or the complete education, the highest and complete level education as in the past, then the undesirable and problematic dichotomy between the university and vocational technical education would persist. And if the higher education should also encompass the lifelong learning, the Udom Siksa must signify everything from post-basic education to lifelong learning that the country is still lacking. I'm sure I'm not the first one who speak or make of such observations, but like many of you, passionately, I feel that we cannot dream of getting the country out of the middle income trap and moving the country into Thailand 4.0 if we do not revolutionize our education, if I'm allowed to use that word here, or rather to overhaul our education system. Reform may not be sufficient. We have to overhaul our education system to produce the new generation of our workforce. Many studies have been done, many speeches have been delivered, many overseas study trips by our education experts and officials have been made. I believe we know what our problems are, but today it requires all of us in unison to speak, to plan, and to execute the solutions. I strongly submit to this August gathering that the overhaul of the education system is the key to Thailand getting out of the middle income trap and to Thailand 4.0, without which I can see very little hope of success. So let me welcome you to join me, the train of the education overhaul, if you will, and let us set it in motion as fast, as safe, and sound as possible. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was quite an inspirational opening. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think in your speech you touched upon a range of issues that will be addressed in the subsequent sessions, but it was first and foremost a very passionate plea on the role of education in middle-income countries. Thank you very much. And with that, it's time to invite our first panel to the stage. I will do that very briefly, and I leave it to the moderator to do that more elaborately. I would like to invite to the stage Asian Development Bank Vice President, Mr. Wisaweisuan. I would like to invite Professor Paipul Kumsup, Professor of the Faculty of Economics of Thammasat University, and former Deputy Minister, Vice Minister of Energy in Thailand, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Director of the Social Development Division of UNESCAP, and last but not least from the Pacific, Mr. Kolonevai, former Finance Secretary of the Government of Samoa. And before we start, I realized that I forgot to introduce the moderator. My apologies. I will make up for that. Vice Rector of Academic Affairs of Thammasat University and also the head of the International Student Center of Thammasat University, Ms. Nitinant. I wish you a lot of enjoyment with the opening session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Han. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have listened to a very enthusiastic and very inspiring speech. Now it comes to the first opening session, which we have very distinguished speakers with us. 4 of them are here. Allow me to start with an introduction of each speaker so that we get to know all of them here. This session, which is the importance of second-generation structural reform and innovation, thanks the ADB and also Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University, for kindly organizing this part of the session. The first speaker that we are going to hear is Dr. Wisaweisuan. Dr. Wisaweisuan is Vice President, we are promoting you. Vice President Operations 1 of the Asian Development Bank, or ADB. He joined the ADB in December 2013, and before that he served as a Deputy Director General for the International Department of the MOF from July 2004 to 2012. Mr. Chang at the moment is responsible for operations in South Asia Department and West Asia Department in the ADB. He was the advisor to the executive director of China at the World Bank in Washington D.C. So he has experience with a number of developing countries as well as developed countries, and so for the 50 years of ADB, we hope that he can share a lot of experience with us. Mr. Chang holds a PhD in finance from the Chinese Academy of Social Science, and also he had a master's degree and bachelor degree in international economics from Nankai University in Tianjin PRC. That's Dr. Winsai Chang. The second speaker that we will be listening to is Professor Praipon Kumsap. Professor Praipon Kumsap is an independent researcher and policy consultant to government agencies in industry, energy, and international economics affairs. He was Vice Minister of Ministry of Energy in Thailand and a member of National Reform Council as well. And Professor Praipon Kumsap was a professor at Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University. He taught economic theories, he taught international economics and also energy economics. Professor Praipon has spent 40 years with Faculty of Economics, I guess, since 1973. And then he was the Dean of Faculty of Economics, Thammasat University. He was also Monetary Policy Committee member of the Bank of Thailand. Professor Praipon Kumsap holds a bachelor degree in economics from University of Western Australia and master degree from Thammasat University and PhD in economics from Yale University. That's Professor Praipon Kumsap. The third speaker that we'll be listening to is Dr. Nagesh Kumar. Dr. Nagesh Kumar is a director of Social Development Division of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, or we call UNSCAP. He had earlier served as the SCAP Chief Economist and Director Macroeconomic Policy and Development Division, and also head of SCAP South and Southwest Asia Office. Before joining the SCAP, Dr. Kumar was Director General of the Research and Information System for Developing Countries in New Delhi, which is a New Delhi-based policy think tank. Dr. Kumar had authored, I think, about 17 books and also about over 100 peer-reviewed papers. So he gained a PhD from Delhi School of Economics. And he also is a recipient of the Exim Bank of India's first International Trade Research Award and the Global Development Network's Research Medal. That's Dr. Nagesh Kumar. And fourth speaker for end here is Mr. Cologne Vine. Mr. Cologne Vine is a co-managing director of KVA Consult Limited. He's an which is an international consulting firm, and he has experience in financial and economic reforms in the Pacific region, in particular in terms of the role of the public sector in Samoa. He is also has a number of experience in the investment, particularly in the private sector in tourism, financial and insurance services in the Pacific. So that's Dr. Cologne Wine. So ladies and gentlemen, we have 4 speakers with us here, and each of them will kindly share views and comments, of course, on the importance of second generation structural reform and innovation. I'd like to do like this, that each speaker will have time, about 7 minutes, to give the first round comments, and then afterwards we will listen to floor. So you have pigeonhole, which is the technology that Mr. Hans had introduced you this morning. So you can pose your questions in the pigeonhole as well as standing up and or asking the questions that you may like to share. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start from the first speaker, Vice President Chang, as he had experience with ADB, and we know that ADB had now, I think, celebrating 50 years of the establishment. So it's an excellent position for the ADB to shed your light on the remarkable transformation of particularly Asia Pacific region. So I'd like to invite you to share with us on the idea of the structural reform, particularly on the priorities of what we should do in order to get away from the middle income trap, and what kind of threats, what kind of barriers that you can see so that we can have the achievement in getting away from the middle income trap. Some ideas like employment creation, education reform, promoting private sector development, and safeguarding against further environmental degradation. That could be some ideas that I think ADB have been involved in quite extensively so far. So VP Vice President Chang, now the floor is yours for 7 minutes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here. Let me see that I visited Bangkok for many times, and before I joined Asian Development, I was senior officials for the of China Ministry of Finance, dealing with the many regional, global and issues, and including our Chiang Mai initiatives and Asian bond market. I can recall that I back to maybe more than 10 years, back 2002, 2003. I came here. We talk about after the Asian financial crisis, how we strengthen our financial cooperation among the ASEAN +3. So I came here for many meetings. I know Thailand has been one of the leading countries in promoting regional cooperation. As you can see, the Chiang Mai initiative, we use the Chiang Mai, the city of one of the city of the Thailand, as a name of the initiative. So you can see that the Thai's contribution to the regional financial and economic cooperation. Let me see that today, this is a very important topic. This is a topic for me as a development, I should say development banker, right? ADB, has been set up for 50 years. We are dealing with the poverty reduction, in a region, try to support the development member country to move to the higher living standard, and also achieve more inclusive, more environmentally sustainable growth, more balanced growth, and also more regional integration and cooperation. So this is all our strategic agenda, for us every day we have to think about. So this middle income trap or kind of issue is certainly very important for the institution like ADB. So I feel that like I said, the ADB is celebrating 15 years. We were set up back to 1966. Already over 50 years now. This year is 51. So we recently launched a history book, what we call 50 years of the ADB. So maybe you can try to get that book and read that book. So about the ADB's last 50 years. So we can see that because I also was born in the 1960s. So I personally witnessed the significant achievement, right? The changes that that happen in the region, including in my country where I'm from. I'm from China. So I personally see the significant evolution. Of course, I may visit many of our Asian developing economies. So now I'm in charge of South Asia and Central West Asia of our ADB's operation. So I can see that through my eyes, right? The significant achievement in poverty reductions, economic social development. So we have a figure, right? So we see that back to 1991, 90, right? If I remember correct, right? 90% of population, in a region, right, live in the low income. But now back, come to the 2015, we have more than 95 population now live in the middle income. So basically, majority of the country in a region, right, live in the middle income. This is the fact. I think Marvin mentioned about how many countries, 37 you mentioned, right, among our developing member, right, now enjoying the middle income. So by the 2020, we'll see more, right, coming to the middle income. Maybe very few by 2020, still living maybe in the low income. So that's the situation we're facing. Of course, once they move to the middle income, how they can move to the higher income. Right? Of course, this is what we should discuss today. And of course, many countries, I said, despite a great achievement, still face a lot of challenges. Right? Look at the infrastructure deficit. Still, many countries, right? They face a lot of infrastructure constraint. And human capital resources. I think our keynote speaker talk about the education issue. Maybe later I will go in more detail, right? The soft side of the human capital. And also many countries, you don't have a very strong, financial sector, and also, the public sector, still very weak. Capacity is weak. And they also, we see that the income equality, also other kind of equality, inequality is a big challenge for many countries between urban and rural, with different part of the group, people, right, in a society. And so I reach, some people very rich, but still many people still are relatively poor. We still have more than 300 million people living in less than $1.9 a day in our region, right? Still many poor living in this region. Right? I mean, even from global perspective. So we still have a lot of things to do for the poverty reduction. So, many other things, even, that this region also faces a lot of environmental issues, climate change issues, very vulnerable to the disaster, different kind of disaster, tsunami, earthquake, typhoon, many these kind of things, right? So how can we deal with that? Many countries, they have, dominated by the state-owned enterprises. Sometimes state-owned enterprises are not so efficient. Also big task for SOE reforms. Private sector also, right? Relatively, not so developed, right? So, many challenges, right? So still, no room for complacency. I don't have enough time, so I have to finish and quickly move. So 7 minutes, right? So looking at the challenge, look at the achievement, right? Yeah. So I think, based on our study, we feel that if the country, really needed to move to the, can move to the high income from middle income, we really needed to, to have a very strong, human resources capital. We must also have a very good, innovation, right? And, they really should also try to promote productivities from technology, advancement, and also, right, from innovation. So this is something, human resources. And also we needed to build a very strong infrastructure in place, right? So this is something also very important. Not only the basic road, urban water sanitation, power, but also, IC, information, telecommunication and the information system. Also high level digital economy now these days, particularly we're talking about, right? So this is very important things, and also I think they need to try to develop their not just their manufacturing sector, high value, and also service sector. They should move from the the agriculture base to the high value manufacture and the service sector, right? They should develop their. I don't have time to talk about the changes. Still we see some countries still, right, are very much dominated by agriculture in terms of GDP growth, in terms of job creation. But how can we move to diversify economy, right, to the more manufacturers and the service sector driven economy? So these kind of things are all issue. Regional balance, more balance development among different regions, urban and rural. So many things. These are all structural issues, right? Many countries still suffer from a very narrowed economy, only few sectors, only few products. I don't have time to elaborate, but I think we needed to do a lot of things for this. So I think certainly ADB now we are working with many countries. We support the infrastructure, huge deficit infrastructure. So we talk about $26 trillion, right? Big gap by before 2030. We are supporting human capital development like a TVET, technical vocational, not just the primary, but also right vocational education and higher education. We support also public sector management, financial physical public finance, capital market development, banking sector, SME financing, and many other. We also support I think structural reform in many other ways. And also we try also support regional cooperation. I think finally I want to say, countries should also do a lot of things at country level, but as a regional, sub-region level, we are still, we should do more. We have achieved something, but I think these days you see a lot of initiative for the regional and even inter-regional cooperation. Like China proposed Belt Road Initiative, Japan proposed for high quality infrastructure, and some new Silk Road, many other countries, other initiatives. So I just say that the country in the region should really use this initiative to support their structure, structure reform. With that, I should stop. Sorry, I don't have time to mention.
Thank you very much, Vice President Shah. You have given us a very long list of things to do, and those are the long lists that I think we have to spend perhaps weeks on the symposium, perhaps for the next time of the ADB, and perhaps Thammasat University can co-organize this, and then bring in each of the items that you have mentioned. Of course, these are the long list of things that the ADB had implemented and get engaged with a number of Asia-Pacific countries here, and particularly middle-income countries. Now, I think there must be some specific areas that need priorities in terms of structural reforms. And now we are very honored that we have a former Vice Minister of Energy of Thailand, Professor Praipon Kumsap, who had been involved in a number of policies and also actions in order to make the energy sector to be more effective and productive. So in terms of transition to renewables, I think it's a very important and very essential for the structural reform. So now I'd like to invite Professor Kumsap to share your views on particularly the required reforms in the energy sector, particularly to get the achievement in getting away from the middle income trap. Please.
Thank you, Nitinant. First, let me thank Economics Faculty of Thammasat University and the ADB for inviting me to speak in this session. I would also like to join our ADB colleagues in fact congratulating a number of Asian nations, Asian countries in achieving the middle income status, while we have a lot more to do to move us up from this so-called middle income trap. I will limit myself to the issue of energy. All right, I'm sure there are other topics that people are interested, but I think energy is one of the important part in the structural reform in a number of countries. Energy has created both serious problems and also hopeful opportunities for the world economy. As you know, rising and fluctuating oil prices have brought high inflation, trade deficits, and foreign debts to a number of oil importing countries, Thailand included. The use of fossil fuels have proved to be the main source of carbon emissions, leading to global warming, which is detrimental to our environment. And I do believe in the concept of climate change and global warming. I don't think it is a hoax, like some world leaders, and I don't think it is created by or for the Chinese. It's really science, true science, not fake science. At the same time, we are seeing more use of clean and renewable energy in the form of solar, wind, hydropower, biomass, and biogas. As a result, the world will be able to rely more on these clean fuels and less relying on the dirty fossil fuels. This should give us hope that we'll be able to maintain sustainable economic growth without harming the earth. And for many emerging economies, energy reforms, particularly the promotion of renewable energy, present a good opportunity to lift themselves from the middle income trap through the adoption of new technologies. As I see it, the economic reforms and the transition towards renewable energy can contribute to sustainable and inclusive economic growth in 4 ways. First, one aspect of economic reform is to get the prices right for energy products, particularly petroleum products, oil products. Prices should reflect the true cost of energy. Subsidies and other forms of price distortions must be removed. And I'm proud to say that in Thailand, most subsidies and price distortions have already been removed, either removed or reduced for all petroleum products. And it has been done in the past 2 years, by the way. Now, this should lead to efficiency in the use and production of energy, and it should lead to better productivity in the overall economy. In the process, the use and production of renewables are also encouraged. For example, in Thailand, the removal of subsidies on diesel oil helps to promote the use of biodiesel, which is extracted from palm oil, one of the major crops in Thailand and in this region as well. Also, instead of wasteful subsidies on oil products, the government can better spend tax money in providing adequate and affordable fuels for the people who are really poor. Now, the second point has to do with efficient pricing and appropriate fiscal regimes which tend to promote local petroleum and renewable energy sources. Now, this is very important for all importing countries, particularly emerging economies, where production of local energy can significantly reduce the expensive imports of oil. So it should save foreign exchange and should strengthen their international economic position. Now, the third point has to do with renewables. As I mentioned before, more and better use of renewables not only contributes to the world's effort to combat the climate change problems, but also creates better local environment, cleaner air and water, less severe droughts and floods, and this clearly should raise the quality of life of many people and improve the livelihood of farmers, most farmers, because their production normally depends on nature. The last point, some countries plan to develop their industrial sector through research and development and innovation in a number of new technologies, including clean energy technology. I think it is worth noting that a number of these so-called disruptive technologies are very much related to renewables. One of them is to generate power from renewables, renewable sources such as solar panels and wind turbines. Another technology is energy storage, which include batteries. The development of better batteries has enabled us to widely use mobile phones. Now almost everybody in the world can use mobile phones simply because of smaller and better batteries. But it also enabling the world to use electric cars instead of the internal combustion engine cars using oil. And this is very important. I should note that the replacement of electric vehicles for the oil-consuming cars is expected to reduce the world demand for oil by the year, some predict it to be in the year 2040, for example. So it should be about 20 or 30 years in the future. Thailand, for example, has designated 10 the so-called S-curve industries as our new engines of growth, which the government believe will move Thailand towards a high-income country. And one of these industries is biotechnology industry, which covers biochemical products, and among them is biofuels, as you know it in terms of in the name of ethanol and biodiesel. And we know that ethanol is made from sugar cane and cassava, and biodiesel is produced from palm oil. So this is an example where a country like Thailand try to use clean energy technology to develop their technology and upgrade their industries into a more sort of a high technology industries in the hope that it will pull or it will push our economy towards a higher income status. So these are all that of my thought that I have in terms of using energy as a way in which the country can pull themselves out of the middle income trap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Prapon Kumsap. You have provided us a very clear list of the action plan that each country can think about and implement afterwards. The energy is one of the priority that I believe that a number of countries would put in priorities for the structural reform. So before we come back for the next round, I'd like to move on to Dr. Nagesh Kumar. Dr. Nagesh Kumar, you are senior officer of the for the UNSCAP, and you have been involved in a number of social development and social equity. So I think in terms of answering or trying to find recommendations for getting away from the middle income trap, one issue that is very important is about social equity, and as well as the social security that each population has to be safe as well. So the importance of social security itself as the systems which may involve with the financial sector, public finance, and also a number of policies that involve a strategic plan of the national development. So from your experience, can you share with us what type of reforms, what kind of actions that we can do in terms of social security, and how can these be achieved? Please, Dr. Kumar.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this very timely event, the ADB and the Thammasat University. I'm very pleased to be part of this very eminent panel, and so thank you very much for the invitation. I think the question that is posed to me, the relevance of social security and social protection as a part of second generation of reforms to pull economies out of the middle income trap in Asia and the Pacific is very, very important issue. I think I would try to argue that not only social protection would be a key driver or important factor for bringing inclusivity in the growth process, making or helping in social cohesion and equity and poverty reduction, but also for sustaining the growth as we are now slowing down because of the global financial crisis and its after effects. I hardly need to emphasize on the success story of Asia and the Pacific region, which has been talked since morning in the key addresses this morning, and VP Chang also talked about it, how this region has produced success stories, nations after nations, sustaining very high growth and becoming more prosperous middle income and high income countries that is certainly cause for celebration. But there are also, and it has been pointed out, there is no room for complacency, because there are still 400 million people stuck in this region, Asia Pacific region, in extreme poverty, which is defined at the $1.9 a day. But if you use the slightly broader definition of poverty of all vulnerable people, which is at $3.1 a day, there are 1.2 billion people stuck in that poverty. So basically the job is not done yet. The other thing which has come out of this rapid growth of Asia and the Pacific is rising or widening inequalities, and it has been talked about. It is one of the mega trends of Asia and the Pacific, and a number of very influential books have been written recently on how inequalities are widening and rising and are becoming a source of tension. And to just give you a couple of descriptors or numbers, the richest 10% in Asia and the Pacific have twice the income of the poorest 40%. And in terms of wealth, it is even more staggering. The top 20% account for up to 80% of wealth. So this is clearly not a healthy trend. And we have been looking into inequalities in Asia and the Pacific. There was a report produced last year which showed that basically the root cause of these inequalities in income and wealth are to be traced in the inequalities of opportunities, that some are born privileged, they have better access to higher education, technical education, and the kind of skills that are needed in this economy, which command a premium, as the former Deputy Prime Minister was talking about this morning. So there are systematic and very sort of entrenched differences between rural and urban populations, for instance, between rich and poor people, for instance, or the gender divide. So there are some privileged few who get access to the best educations, and then they do well, they become billionaire entrepreneurs of the day. And so this is the inequality of opportunities is basically driving the inequalities of income and wealth. And the other mega trend of Asia and the Pacific is the rapid aging. The combination of declining fertility with rising incomes and increasing longevity or life expectancy have produced, a combination of rapidly aging population in Asia and the Pacific. And when I say rapid, just to give you an example, in Asia, the aging is happening at such a fast pace. For instance, Vietnam will complete this transition from a young workforce to an aging workforce in 19 years, while France took 150 years to get that transformation. So Asia is aging much faster than other regions, and that means that creates a lot of challenges. We have to prepare ourselves for providing good care and income support to the elderly or the aging people who will be there. And the projections are that by 2050, 1 in 4, 25% of Asia's population will be in that bracket of 60 plus, So this is a very big challenge. Then there are other segments of vulnerable populations. The people with disabilities. There are 650 million people in Asia and the Pacific with some kind of disabilities. They have, vulnerabilities, and then there are migrant workers, there are ethnic populations who are excluded for different regions. So the important policy tool to address these inequalities and exclusion of people is social protection. And it has been recognized by now very widely that social protection and investment in that is a very smart, very fruitful investment that governments can make. There is a very clear relationship in one of the studies that we produced recently. It turns out, the very clear relationship between the extent of social protection and the poverty reduction. The inverse relation comes out very clearly. Then the other example I can quote is some CG simulations we were doing, which showed, the South Asia region where bulk of the Asia's poverty is concentrated now. What would it take to eliminate that poverty, by 2030, which is a goal of the Sustainable Development Agenda. And so we were looking at different possibilities, different policy tools. What will it, do if we increase or accelerate the growth rate? What will happen if we accelerate the growth and change its composition in favor of more job creation and more manufacturing or industrialization, and and all different policy tools. But what came out very clearly was that to eliminate poverty in South Asia, it would require increased emphasis on social protection on top of accelerating and sustaining good growth, and on top of creating job creation and all that. So social protection comes out as a very critical policy tool and important policy agenda. Now, what needs to be done, and this was the question that moderator posed to me. Basically, we need to enhance and broaden the coverage of social protection. And when we say social protection is actually broader than social security, and so we need to basically guarantee a certain minimum basic standards of living to every citizen. And this is the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, if you like. And so when I'm talking of certain minimum basic needs, one is talking about education, health, the modern energy, the electricity, for instance, sanitation, and of course nutrition and income support or income security. And we talk about a social protection floor, and then you can build on that. So many countries are looking at cash transfers, for instance, to vulnerable populations or vulnerable households, including the old people, disabled, unemployed, and these cash transfers could be conditional sometimes or unconditional. Some countries are trying to package the income support with some other social objectives, like empowering women, for instance. So cash transfer will become available if you do certain things. If you put your kids in the school, then you get certain cash. And a number of countries have adopted all different types of social protection schemes, including the Dibao program in China, the Narega scheme in India, which is unemployment security for rural poor, the 4P program in Philippines. And then a number of countries are adopting social pensions, for instance in Myanmar, Nepal, Thailand, Samoa. So social pensions for the elderly, to provide them income support and prevent them from falling into poverty trap. So there is at this moment my time is up, but just very quickly, there is a very big debate going on presently about these transfers, whether they should be targeted or universal, because one would think that targeting to poor would be more efficient and effective, but then there are problems of leakages. So then the other alternative is to have universal approach, but with negative list. So certain people who do not need are excluded, but rest are all covered. So I think there is a very healthy debate going on at this moment, and maybe we can come back to that in the discussion. But what I'm trying to argue is that the increased emphasis on social protection is something which is to be now looked at much more seriously for a people-centered transformation of Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I'm sure that you have drawn a number of attention to, particularly on the issue of social security, social protection. We can come back to you over the second round, particularly on discussing on the inequality of opportunities. I think that is very important to have the reform so that everyone can be ensured to get access to the opportunities equally. Right. So now allow me to move on to the fourth speaker. Mr. White, you have listened to all the three speakers, and I'm sure that there are a number of things that every single organizations who are engaged in the poverty reduction policy or promoting the income equality to do. So now we have addressed a number of issues, a number of reform priorities, and there might be some relevant to particular countries. Some may be less relevant to some other countries. Now, in terms of Pacific region, because you have experience in Samoa, in terms of the Pacific region, are there any unique challenges? Are there any unique priorities that can be set different or set apart from the mainland Asia that you can share with us? So could you please reflect your view on challenges that you have had experience to Asia? Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to thank ADB for inviting me here. I think it's a very good opportunity not only to share and hear how the middle income countries in other parts of Asia performing, but also I guess I'd like to be promoting the special features of island countries, because I've always believed that it's a very good partnership. In Samoa and most of the other Pacific countries have been members of ADB since the beginning. And I guess the issue that we're always debating is how relevant are the strategies in Asia to the Pacific. I guess I'll focus first on the topic that we have, and the question is, are we caught in the trap as a middle income countries? From the Pacific perspective, of most of the Pacific Island member countries for the Asian Development Bank are now in the middle income category, albeit they're in the lower middle income country categories. And most of them have just recently got into that category. So if you're asking, are they caught in the trap? I would say, as sort of new people arriving into that category, they have facing a lot of problems making the transition because they have unique features in terms of the geographical layout in the Pacific. As you all know, we keep telling ourselves in the Pacific that we do have this huge potential with the oceans. large economic exclusive zones, but that also brings in the geographical isolation that's there, and the related costs, communications, transport, all the prohibitive developmental challenges that are there. We also, in the Pacific, are dealing with relatively small economies. When I say relatively small, you're talking about, I guess, Papua New Guinea sort of skews the group. But if you take up Papua New Guinea, you're now dealing with, I would say, relative to the other Asian countries, sort of micro-states. In terms of the GDP, I would say 3 or 4 only are about 1 billion US. Most are below. In terms of populations, you're dealing with countries and taking out Papua New Guinea again, apart from Fiji and Timor, if you bring Timor into the Pacific, and you're dealing with most of the countries below 500,000 people. Now, I would like to put that across because I think that the combination of all those factors create a set of imperatives that are extremely difficult to develop an economy, let alone trying to break out of this trap that they're caught in. Because as you graduate into the middle income category, your access to concessionary financing starts to be restricted. Your access to trade concessions, market concessions also become restricted. So you're faced with an extremely difficult immediate issue of access. Now, I'm not saying that the countries themselves were not aware of the consequences, but the responses so far have been very temporary measures. But you're dealing with these structural issues that cannot be resolved in 3 or 4 years, because the responses so far by the international community is to delay the graduation by 3 or 4 years, and also with the trade concessions, even at the bilateral level, most of the island countries were only given 4 or 5 years. So these are the imperatives that are there that inhibit the countries not only getting a strong foothold in the middle income category, but to try and grow in that area. In terms of further challenges, the most recent study of small island states have identified that 6 of the ADB Pacific member countries are in the top 20 most vulnerable countries to natural disasters. Now, even if you got all your policy framework in place, but if you get a natural disaster every second year, you're back to square one for most of the time. And in the case of Samoa, for 5 years, it was struggling just to gain a 1% growth rate, because you had a sequence or a series of natural disasters, a tsunami, cyclones, all coming in at once. Now, those sort of events do trap these countries in the present situation. I can go on and identify a lot of other challenges, but having made all the sort of gloom about the Pacific, I still feel that there are a lot of opportunities out there, which ADB, through its 50 years, has also helped out a lot in trying to develop the potential that's there. The most recent one is in the communications. In terms of connectivity, ADB has invested heavily in submarine cables. Now, for a small, geographically isolated economy, what a way to try and get out of the trap, because now the tyranny of distance is gone. I can sit in with high-speed internet. We can start connecting to the economies and start to hopefully develop some trading services. We also have done a lot of work in the fisheries area, but this still hasn't been fully realized in terms of the Pacific having a very effective influence in the global markets in terms of the fisheries area. So I guess I just want to end in saying that the ADB, through its 50 years, has done a lot, but can do a lot more if it wants the Pacific countries who are caught in this trap to come out of it. And there are a number of areas which I've identified include ADB leading the development financing for climate change. Now, the Pacific now is inundated with a range of facilities, but the most difficult part now is accessing that funding. And ADB, with its 50 years of experience, it's a lot more sort of experience and has the networks and support to be able to deliver that funding compared to the other new institutions who are trying to come into this area. Lastly, I'd like to make a point about ADB taking a balanced approach to private sector development in the Pacific, particularly in taking into consideration the more active role of commercial state-owned enterprises. I'm saying that because of the scale and the contestability of markets in the Pacific. I'd like to end there, and I can provide any further comments later on if there are questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. And we have a number of interesting questions and comments from the Pigeonhole. And before I give the floor to the audience, let me pick up some of the questions which I think we can pose this to speakers. I like to read this at the beginning, to read this all, and then speakers can get some idea as what the audience are interested in. For example, we have one question. I start from the highest wards. There are 9 wards on this. As seen the reform, the must. But what are the keys to achieve these reforms? Could you please illustrate the best practice as example? This is the first one that I like to just pause it there for you to for some ideas, so that you can think about what kind of best practice, for example, in Samoa, that you can show us as an example. Or in terms of ADB, did you have any best practice for in the 50 years experience? How about energy sector? This is I'll read the second one. Social protection. In terms of social protection, we understand how this ameliorates inequality, but how does it affect growth? Are there lessons on how social protection can be done to increase private investment and entrepreneur? I guess that this is the number of entrepreneur, number of business. So are there any lessons on how social protection can be done to increase private investment and entrepreneurship, I think, or business establishment? So perhaps the second question, I pose this to Mr. Kumar. And for the first one, can I start from oops, I'm sorry, I just lost it. Sorry. So can I have the social protection issue to Mr. Kumar and the best practice question to Vice President Chang?
Best practice on the reform or something?
The first one.
In general or specific reforms?
Are there the keys to achieve the reform?
Oh, very big question.
Yes.
Okay.
Could you please illustrate the best practice as example?
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So can you start first? Maybe the
okay,
first.
All right. Okay, thank you. Yeah, this is a very big topic. I think we also try to not only provide financial resources to the country, but also try to facilitate knowledge, development, experience sharing. This is what we are trying to do. This is including how country do the reforms. Many front, right? So even like for example, we support infrastructure development. In a different area like transport, energy, urban water sanitation. Irrigation, right, among many others. So, of course, you need resources at the very beginning, but also you need to reform the sector, like energy sector. Okay, you do the energy, you want to, make the sector financially, environmentally, economically viable, right? So you have to reform the sector. We support investment, like power generation, transmission, distribution, right? This is normally we are trying to do. At the same time, how can we make sure it is really, after project completion, really make it really sustainable in many years to come, right? You have to reform tariff, regulatory reform in the sector, right? And institutional development for the energy sector. How you engage more private sector. You need to see how you attract more PPP project in the energy sector. Right? So tariff reform also very politically maybe could be very sensitive, but also very important. If we don't have a reasonable tariff here, right? So how can you get the private sector? So just to give example, this kind of thing, right? So education also, we support, right? Primary education and also higher education. Now these days we are trying to do more vocational education, technical education, skill training, because we feel like the keynote speaker said, in early part of this morning, right? So these days you may have a lot of graduate, right, college student, right, every year, but you also need a lot of people, right, working as a technical level, right? They don't need to maybe have a degree for the university degree, but you should also have more engineer and other technical kind of work people, right? You must make sure those, young people after they graduate, they need to get a skill that really market really need. So we are trying to do something to match the skills the market need and also the young people, what skill they have. So you see, a lot of these kind of interesting things we are trying to do. So he called for the revolutionary, right, of this education reform. I think also that's a very important message. So I can give you many things, financial sector, SOE reform, business environmental reform, so important. I see a lot of good experience. Country, many countries have good experience. So, the country can learn from each other. So because I just even for these days, business environment improvement, the private sector, so important, right? Many countries try to do that. Many countries talk to me, Vice President, can you help us to develop more kind of, PPP project, public-private project in a different sector. This is quite a common, request for many governments in the region. But sometimes they don't know how to do it, right? So that will require a lot of, things. You may need a PPP unit in a country. You may need a PPP Act, PPP law in a country, right, from the very beginning. You also need to, as I said, do the sector reform. You also have to strike, the structure deal for a specific PPP project. So I think, a lot of things, a country can learn from each other. Some country already at a very advanced stage for the PPP kind of, modality, right? Some maybe still at the learning stage. So many things, I think that's why ADB, I said, we as a development bank, we should not only facilitate transfer of resources, but transfer of knowledge, best practice, right? And, these kind of things.
Right, thank you. So it seems that the collaboration, the partnership, the coordinating mechanisms can also help the reforms to be successful,
that's
as
right.
you mentioned. I can get some points from what you just said. So in terms of social protection, Dr. Kumar, can you share with us? I think there is a question that can you post it on the screen as well, so that the audience can see the question. So Dr. Kumar, can you please share your views on the question, please?
Yes. Well, there are two parts to this question. One is about how social protection could affect growth. And I hinted at that, but I didn't have time to elaborate. I think if you look at the growth trajectory of Asia and the Pacific countries, before the onset of the Lehman Brothers crisis in 2008, the Asian economies were growing at a very fast pace, and the key drivers of that growth were, the ability of Asian economies to tap the opportunities created by globalization. So some countries were focusing on exporting goods, the others were exporting services and growing very rapidly. But as the growth rate of world trade has come down after the onset of the crisis from, say, 12% per year kind of rate of growth of world trade, now 2% is considered to be very good. So when you have gone from that phase of pre-crisis of 10, 12% to now just 2%, it has obviously affected the ability of Asian countries to grow with the globalization and exploiting the opportunities. And as a result, the growth rates have come down and they are growing at a much more subdued rate of growth. So basically, you need a new stimulus for supplementing the aggregate demand to pull or stimulate growth. And social protection could be doing that by putting incomes, purchasing power in the hands of poor, or pushing the poor to join the mainstream of consumers. And there is a huge potential, untapped huge potential of doing that, because as I was saying earlier, there are 1.2 billion people in $3.1 a day, in this region. So if you put purchasing power in their hands and they join the mainstream of middle class consumers, that will drive the growth in the future. So it is very clear to me that social protection is not only needed for equity, but also for sustaining and driving Asia's growth. The second part of the question is about how can private sector contribute to social protection. I think there are, very interesting examples from Asia. The corporate social responsibility, the enterprises, companies and businesses begin to realize and accept their corporate social responsibility and contribute to the creation of social infrastructure, social investments, complementing what the governments can do and are doing. And in many countries, the business sector, private sector has sort of started to contribute to the social investments. And in India, for instance, there was a new law which came into force last year, which requires all private sector companies to put aside 2% of their profits for CSR, corporate social responsibility. And that has put in the market some $8 to $10 billion of additional money for social, investments. So there's a huge potential of mobilizing and harnessing private sector, and their resources for social protection and all other social investments. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the floor? Yes. Can I start from the gentleman? Yes, please. The first one, and then Mr. Hans, you second. Can I have three? Maybe the third person. Is there anyone who would like to pose a question on the floor? Okay, the third one. All right. 1, 2, and 3. Yes.
Morning, I'm Manny Jimenez from 3IE. Thanks very much for a fascinating conversation. I had a question about political economy of what we're talking about. There's nothing tougher by the definition by structural reform because it requires trade-offs of actually vested interests. For example, you can have submarine cables, but unless you get rid of monopolies on the technology, that may not lead to the right outcome. I thought you could share with us some lessons of how to get over these political economy questions to make sure the decisions are made.
This one, Mr. White, could you share with us this question? We start from, okay, I listen to the question and then we can do the answering in one round. Is it okay? Mr. Hans, can you pose a second question?
One of the things that quite radically changes when countries graduate to middle income status is that they get access to a much wider spectrum of commercial credit and commercial equity. And as a result of that, the significance of development assistance actually decreases. You see that definitely in mainland Asia. It's a very distinctive trend. But my question to Mr. Vai is, how do you see the potential of the islands, given the scale of the economies, to make use of their middle income status to tap into commercial forms of credit and to attract equity investments from the private sector?
Can we also listen to the third question then?
Thank you. Thomas Parks from the Asia Foundation. I wanted to just respond to the first question and just to provide, maybe to try to take that a bit further. I mean, in a lot of ways, the core question that faces countries in a middle income trap is not necessarily what's best for the country, because there's lots of evidence about the best policies or the best technical solutions. It's more about why reform is so hard. And what are the barriers, which gets to the first question that just was asked there as well. What are the barriers? Why? I mean, there's obviously winners and losers if you're going through major structural reforms. So what have other countries learned from how to find compromises in those very difficult dilemmas and trade-offs? Thanks.
My understanding is that you're trying to seek some, I guess, perspective from the Pacific in terms of access to private equity or private capital. I would say it's extremely difficult. If you know what I've said in terms of increasing risks, vulnerability, any private equity person looking into the Pacific would sort of ring fence that and said, well, is it really worth taking a risk in there? We already have issue on the scale in terms of profitability and all that. So it's extremely difficult. Before the graduation, countries are basically advised to in terms of the central bank nurturing a track record with the private placement of bonds, trying to entice the private sector capital markets. Now, a lot of efforts have gone into that, but to my knowledge, been very limited success, and it really comes back to the scale of what are profitable investments that the private sector can invest in, apart from fisheries, tourism, and that. Another related issue to that is, I guess in the 80s, some smaller island countries thought, well, to try and attract private capital, maybe we should set up offshore centers. Then once they come to the offshore centers, and then they can make the next step of coming on island. Unfortunately, that really hasn't worked in terms of the Pacific. It's not only have the OECD have clamped down on that, but also I'm not aware of any major institution that has made the transition from offshore to onshore and comes back again to the constraints and the risks that countries face in the Pacific.
Great. So in terms of barriers of reform as well, allow me to pose this question to Professor Kumsap, please.
I think the question has to do with the political economy of how to introduce structural reform. I'm sure there are winners and losers, certainly, particularly at the stage where the country has reached a higher income level status. To give an example, I think a good example would be useful. In Thailand, for example, when we try to introduce or try to promote the production and the use of electric vehicles, cars that use batteries. A lot of local manufacturers of vehicle parts complain that they will be out of business because they produce parts that are used for, internal combustion engine, parts of engines, which will be no longer used in electric vehicles, for example. As you know, Thailand has been one of the major exporters of vehicles in the region. And they are mostly internal combustion engine cars, not electric vehicles. We haven't been into the new area of production. So here's the trade-off, right, between some major producers of cars that are interested in investing in new kind of vehicles, electric vehicles, and yet the government has to take care of the local producers of some parts, the vehicle parts that are used for oil-consuming cars. What can we do about it? We don't want to be left behind, definitely, in this new technology, and we know that the rest of the world is moving towards electrical vehicles. The development of batteries, as I mentioned in my opening remark, has been very rapid. And in the next 20 years, most new cars will be electric vehicles, electric cars. So the question is how can the government, like in Thailand and many other countries who try to promote, electric cars, deal with this kind of situation, this trade-off. I think the only way is just to give them assistance to adjust to the new reality, the new situation. That's the only choice that the government can make. How can we do it? Well, I think, and they haven't done that, by the way. They are thinking about it. But I think the only way that we can do it in terms of government assistance is to help them adjust themselves from moving away from parts that will be no longer used in the future, in the far future. Nobody would use internal combustion engine cars. But engines are still needed. I'm sure other types of vehicles, trucks, for example, and some other engines or electrical appliances will still be using internal combustion engines. So the only way to do it is to, guide them to move or to adjust themselves away from this old technology or technologies that will become out of date, and upgrade them towards a better technology, new and high technology. It's easier said than done. Very difficult to do it, but it's the only way to do it. I think not to be left behind and move the countries towards a high level of development. That's the only way to do it. Just let people adjust. And I'm sure, these producers, these local producers can adjust if they are given a choice, tax break or some kind of promotional privileges are given, as well as incentives for R&D, innovation, that kind of things can be done. But as I said, it's easier said than done. It's very hard to do. It's another issue by itself, how to do it.
Thank you very much. Reforms, remedies, adjustment, assistance, there are a number of things that have to be involved in order to putting countries to be away from the middle income trap. I think we're quite running out of time, and I'm sorry that I cannot accept any more questions from the floor, but I'd like to hear each speaker to have about 1 minute concluding remark. Perhaps I can start from Vice President Wen Shai-Chang, please.
Okay, thank
1
you.
minute, please.
Thank you very much. I think a couple of points I want to share with our audience here. First, I think, to do this structural reform, to move to the high income, really, I think, not only about money, resources, but also the capacity, skills. Very often we saw that, countries, they have idea, they have strategy, they have policy, but they don't have capacity to implement and to design the reform measure like we discussed. Sometimes, it's very complex, right? So it's a trade-off there. How they design the pace reform, the sequence reform, and very weak, relatively weak public sector, both at central and the local level. This is the case we saw in some of our developing member countries. So how, build that capacity, skills, governance issue is so important, right? So I think knowledge sharing, capacity building, I think are all important. First of all. Secondly, technology and this innovation. I see that we are living this, this what we call fourth industrial revolution state, right? So people talk about a digital economy. And, we also talk about how we can do more, transfer of technology to the developing member country, maybe from developed, right? So how can we do that? Facilitate transfer. Of course, they can try to produce their own technology, have their own, but at maybe early stage, they try to copy, maybe try to learn from others, try to adopt other, countries. So this is something how we, really avoid this kind of digital gap, knowledge gap, technology gap in the coming years between the rich and the poor, between advanced and the developing. This is something, how we need to think. Third about reform, very briefly. I don't want to say, more importance of reform. Reform is so important. So countries must do reform, particularly structural reforms. And fourthly, they also must open up, fully participate, right, in the regional and global economic financial cooperations and participate in a different kind of initiative. I don't have time to elaborate, but I just want to say that. And also, I think I just feel that maybe two things we should pay particular attention. One is climate change. This region, very vulnerable to climate change, disaster. If we don't address this, even you move from middle to higher, maybe you will come back again to the middle. So I think this is something we really need to address. And also another one is financial cooperation. We saw that we have achieved a lot, but still not so balanced, different parts of Asia. We still should deepen our financial cooperation. So with that, I'm quite confident our region is very dynamic. We should be able to move to the high income. I think that's what what I'm saying.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, very brief and very concise and clear. Professor Kumsap, please.
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with Dr. Shang on the difficulty of introducing reform, particularly the second generation reform, because we already achieved to some degree the first generation structural reform. It's not that easy, but we've done that to some extent. Most countries have done that. When it comes to a later stage of reform, I think we are facing with new challenges. some of the speakers have already spoken about the aging society, particularly in Asia. We age very quickly. In Thailand, for example, in the next 10 years, there will be more elderly or old people than the young ones, for example, and the number of workers will be reduced, in fact, in the next 10 years. We are facing a slower growth in the world trade, definitely. I don't know how long it will last, but it has been going on for quite some time. And we are facing with, of course, the danger of climate change related to global warming. This is relatively new. It's new because we just knew it in the last 10 years. It has been going on for at least 100 years already. And I already mentioned disruptive technologies. Some technologies are enhancing the opportunity for people to work, employment, creating employment. Some are reducing employment, for example, robotic technology, for example, autonomous cars, driving cars, for example. You reduce the opportunities for people to work as drivers. So these kind of things are new, all right? And we need definitely a new kind of reform, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
I'm finished,
Yes.
by the way. just try to end it in a way that, first, I think the second generation reform would work on the same principle as the first batch of reform. And I think that is to make the market work efficiently. And of course, the role of public sector is always there to, as we all know, economists know, to take care of the public goods, the externalities, and all kind of that. But I think the second generation reform would have to be something more than that, right? Something more than the efficiency of the market, the role of the public sector. Perhaps it has something to do with the international aspect, the international cooperation. That's a new dimension that we haven't discussed much, because some of the issues that we are facing now is not on a local or even a country scale, it's a global scale. So the climate change, for example. So that's perhaps a new dimension that I would like to mention.
And that's all very important, particularly challenges and those are priorities for our second generation reform as well. So time is quite short. Dr. Kumar, please.
Well, I think for making sure that the fruits of development reach every single person, leave no one behind, social protection is to be looked at, increasingly critical reform for Asia at this stage, at this juncture, in the context of rising inequalities, rising aging, rapidly aging population, and all different kinds of vulnerabilities. So this is a very important reform, but it will be increasingly critical for also sustaining and stimulating growth itself. So Sustainable Development Agenda, 2030 Agenda, also emphasizes and puts a very heavy emphasis on enhancing social protection. And when I say enhancing social protection, it's not just income security for older people, but also universal access to education and health for every child and giving them equal opportunities. That will be a very important sort of reform for the next phase of Asia's development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. White, please.
Okay, I guess I've said everything, but I guess if I've got the opportunity here, I would like to think that if ADB can do a lot more for the Pacific, particularly in enhancing its resilience, because of the issues I've highlighted, the investing more in the ICT connectivity infrastructure, not just, and also the educational reforms that go with it, because that's for the future. It's going to be a transition from agriculture to services. There's very little chance of having any viable manufacturing activity in most of these small island countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the speakers, what you have just said are all relevant, I think, to every organizations, every policy makers, every sectors in economies. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give big applause to all speakers. Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Vice President Chang, Professor Kumsap, Dr. Kumar, and also Mr. Y. And also thank you, the ADB and Thammasat University as well. Now it's time for break. Thank you.